Good morning from WKYT News. I'm Bill Bryant, and we welcome you to Kentucky Newsmakers. Later, we'll have a report from our Sam Dick about a court in Lexington that deals with those with severe mental illness who are often also facing substance abuse and criminal charges. That's coming up in just a bit, a very interesting story. But first, our coverage of Campaign 2019 continues. Today, we welcome Republican candidate for Kentucky Attorney General Daniel Cameron. Kentucky hasn't elected a Republican Attorney General since Eldon Dummett won that powerful post back in 1943. Kentucky has never had an African-American Attorney General, so Cameron hopes to make history on November 5th. To get there, he'll have to defeat former Democratic Attorney General Greg Stumbo, who was with us last week, and Cameron will have to withstand a legal challenge to his qualifications to hold the job. Cameron is campaigning hard. He's a former U of L football player, an attorney for U.S. Senator Mitch McConnell, and now candidate for Attorney General. Welcome. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate you coming
Honored
in.
to be
Yes, sir.
here. Yes, sir.
This is your first political run. Why did you enter the race for Kentucky Attorney General?
Yes. Well, look, I spent 2.5 years as Senator McConnell's general counsel in D.C., and during that period of time, I helped him work on some judicial nominations. But the reason I'm sitting here today is because I worked very closely with the Kentucky law enforcement community. I was the liaison, if you will, between McConnell's office and our law enforcement community back here. So I became intimately familiar with the day in, day out struggles and challenges that our law enforcement community has here as it relates to fighting what is ultimately, in my judgment, become the public safety challenge of our lifetime, and that is the drug epidemic. And so I worked closely with the Kentucky Narcotics Officers Association, Appalachia High Operation Unite, the Warren County Drug Task Force, our Northern Kentucky Drug Strike Force, our federal and state prosecutors, U.S. Marshals Service, FBI, DEA, police chiefs, Sheriff's Association, all of these groups, again, who day in, day out are having to fight the drug epidemic. And so I was honored to help bring in some additional dollars through the Office of National Drug Control Policy to help with our drug interdiction efforts here.
You know, we've been pretty good at identifying as this is a horrible problem in Kentucky.
Yes, sir.
And we know that the toll it has taken on families. We see the expense it is to the communities and the decisions they're having to make to prioritize that over other things maybe that they would like to have. But what is the solution? What do you think we need to do to get our hands around this opioid epidemic?
Well, I always talk about it as the drug epidemic, and the reason I use that term is because we certainly need to continue to focus on the primary issue of the opioid challenges that we have here, and we have to go after the bad actors, whether they be pharmaceutical companies, prescribers, or whomever is bringing this poison into the Commonwealth. But in addition to that, as you talk to the law enforcement community all across the 120 counties here in the Commonwealth, they will tell you we're now starting to see a reemergence of crystal meth here in our communities. And so we have to do an equally, have equal responsibility, if you will, to confront that challenge. So really the AG's office has to have a multifaceted approach to tackling this issue. What I've talked about on the campaign trail is, one, really shifting the mindset of the Office of Attorney General, making sure that we reclaim and renew the promise of this office as the chief law enforcement office. That means advocating very strongly for our Commonwealth and county attorneys and for our law enforcement community more globally. But what that means from a tangible point of view is right now there's a Department of Criminal Investigations in the Attorney General's office. In my judgment, we need to increase the number of drug investigators that we have in that office so that we can be a better partner, a better neighbor to our state and federal law enforcement community. That means better sharing intel. Sometimes our law enforcement community, and they'll tell you this, can get in silos and are not doing a good job of communicating with one another. But I think it's terribly important as we move into this next decade that we're doing a much better job of sharing intel, sharing resources, making sure that we're propping up our multitude of task forces that we have here so that they can really be a force multiplier as we move into this next decade.
Some have said that Kentucky does a heck of a job in putting people in jail or in prison over drugs, but we're not doing a good job treating people who are dealing with it. As you know, we have these woefully overcrowded local jails in many areas. We have 17 full state prisons. What can Kentucky do to reduce that cost of incarceration and get folks treated for what they're addicted to?
Well, the recidivism rate here in Kentucky after, I think, 3 to 4 years is about 50%. So we really have a responsibility to work in the AG's office in a holistic approach to tackling the drug epidemic. We obviously have a responsibility in the Attorney General's office and working with our Commonwealth and county attorneys to make sure that we're in the enforcement business. But we also need to look at this as an addiction and need to look for ways that we can partner with our treatment community to make sure that we're doing a much better job of getting folks reintegrated into society, making sure that we have strong workforce development programs so that folks that are coming out of prison, once they've served their time in prison, that they have an opportunity to not only sustain themselves but to sustain their families so that we break the cycle of addiction and break the cycle of criminality.
I know you've traveled the state a lot, you've talked to a lot of people and gotten their thoughts about what ails the state. What do they tell you that they'd like to see happen?
Well, one of the big things that I hear as I travel across the Commonwealth is that once you get outside the golden triangle, if you will, of northern Kentucky, Louisville, and Lexington, oftentimes Kentuckians feel removed from their state government. And so as I travel far east and far west, you start to hear all the time from folks that say that they don't really have a nexus to what's going on in Frankfort and what's going on in our state government, in particular in our AG's office. So I think it's incumbent upon the next AG, and I've committed to doing this, to making sure we have a visible presence of the Attorney General's office outside of just Louisville and Frankfort, which is where the primary offices are right now. So I'm going to make sure that I'm working with our federally appointed prosecutor Rob Duncan in the Eastern District, our federally appointed prosecutor Russell Coleman in the Western District, to make sure we can figure out some office sharing arrangements and other things to make sure that there is a visible presence of the AG's office outside of where we currently reside. In many ways, it's nice to have a hotline that you can call, but I think it's much better to have boots on the ground that are a representation of the office.
Mr. Cameron, not only are you running a political campaign trying to win this office right now, and as we pointed out, there has not been a Republican Attorney General in 70 years plus, you also face a legal challenge to your qualifications. A ruling could come soon. There could be and are probably expected to be appeals from either side if that happens. Do you believe that you satisfy the requirements under the Kentucky Constitution to be the Attorney General of the Commonwealth?
I absolutely satisfy the requirements to run for Attorney General. Before I got in the race, I obviously looked into that. But the fact of the matter is that you have to have 8 years as a licensed attorney. This was actually something that was litigated against Ben Chandler in 1995. A similar claim, a similar challenge was made against him, saying that he did not have the 8 years of required time as a lawyer, practicing lawyer, to be on the ballot, and the court rebuked that notion. Basically what the court said is that we don't get into the semantics of what your 8 years of practice look like. We want to know how long you have been licensed, and I will have been licensed for 8 years, which is the requirement to run for Attorney General by the November 5th election. At the end of the day, this is a political ploy by Mr. Stumbo through a surrogate. We recognize that in many ways, I think he looks at the polls and sees that he's in a little bit of a trouble and recognizes that people want new leadership in the Attorney General's office as we move into this next decade. They want someone with energy that's going to commit themselves to running hard and working hard and diligently, being a good partner to our law enforcement community. And that's what I put forth. The Fraternal Order of Police have endorsed this campaign because they believe in my ability to help reestablish the credibility of the Attorney General's office as a chief law enforcement office. So we're excited about November 5th.
Let me ask you this.
Yes, sir.
Greg Stumbo told us a week ago on this program he is not behind this lawsuit. But he did say he questions your eligibility. Do you take him at his word that he is not, obviously you do not, that he is not connected to this suit?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that Mr. Stumbo has some, look, that it's not too terribly difficult to make that connection, that he has some connectivity to this lawsuit. you wouldn't file this lawsuit unless you thought that you had some struggle or some challenge in the polls. I think he looks at the polling and is worried and concerned. And if you can't beat somebody at the ballot box, you try to sue them or file a lawsuit against them, and that's where we find ourselves now.
Do you worry about the timing of this, though, being very close to the time that voters are actually going to the polls, when it will be decided as to whether you're clear for the ballot?
Well, folks, look, I think as we've traveled across the Commonwealth, folks, I think in many ways this has backfired because people have been emboldened by and have really been supportive of our campaign because they know this is a dirty tactic, they know that this is a dirty trick, and so we found great strength and encouragement as we travel. I know folks have already told me that they're voting for me because of this exact reason, because they are tired of the sort of political games that have been played in Frankfort for so long. In many ways, the office of Attorney General should be depoliticized.
I have some news for you while
sir.
we're sitting here.
Yes, sir.
It's just been reported to me, the Courier-Journal is reporting that you are eligible.
Well, let me just
say. So the ruling has just come.
Let me just say, Cameron 1, Stumbo 0.
Okay, so we assume there may be an appeal, but
yes,
so we are taping this. So let's be totally transparent here. We're taping this Thursday for replay over the weekend, but the ruling on Thursday has come from the court of jurisdiction that you are eligible.
Well, and look, there's no surprise. I mean, the Ben Chandler case was it wasn't binding precedent, but was very persuasive and compelling precedent. And that was the judgment that was the argument that was articulated in court. And I think the judge looked at that and made the decision, and really unsurprisingly, that I'm qualified. So I am very pleased by that decision. We expected that decision. We're glad to have it. I suppose I'll be able to say that I've not only beat Mr. Stumbo once, but hopefully twice by November 5th.
Do you think you will?
Yes, sir.
Yeah?
Yes, sir.
You feel, I mean, you're getting that kind of feedback? Here's a guy who has been Attorney General before, who's been Speaker of the House, who has run statewide and has that name recognition.
Yes, sir. Well, I think a couple of things. People just want something different in the Attorney General's office. They want somebody that's going to focus on the public safety challenges that we have here in the Commonwealth. And I've talked to folks. Look, Mr. Stumbo was the Attorney General from 2003 to 2007, as you noted. He had an opportunity to run for re-election to be Attorney General, but instead he opted to do something else because he didn't think this job was important enough. I've already made the statement several times that I believe the law enforcement community deserves continuity in this office. They need somebody that wants to lead this office into the next decade. And I think that is reflected and demonstrated by the fact that the Fraternal Order of Police have endorsed this campaign because they believe in my ability to lead it effectively.
I have this question for you. If you were to be elected Attorney General,
yes, sir,
and Andy Beshear were to win the governorship, and so we have that first Republican Attorney General in 70 years, and you have a Democratic governor, what kind of relationship might Kentuckians see? Because when that has been, we've seen at least twice in the last couple of decades, it can get rough when the Attorney Generals of one party and the governors of another.
Yes, sir. Well, look, I've worked with Andy Beshear in the past when I was at Stites and Harbison. And look, I recognize that we've got a tough governor's race. But I'm willing to work with whomever is going to be in the governor's mansion. The public safety challenges that we have here in the Commonwealth really have no Republican or Democrat designation by them. So I want to work with whomever. I think that's one of the reasons that the Fraternal Order of Police endorsed this campaign, is because they recognize that I don't really care about your political designation or your political affiliation as it relates to those public safety challenges. We've got incredible challenges that we have to confront, and I have to be able to work with whomever in our statewide offices, and the men and women that are in our sheriff's roles, in our police chief roles, our mayors. I've got to be able to work with whomever that wants to solve and stem the tide of this epidemic that we have here in Kentucky.
We're with Daniel Cameron. He's the Republican candidate for Kentucky Attorney General. We'll have some more issue questions, some things that may come up in the campaign or before for the next Attorney General when we come back on Kentucky Newsmakers. Well, Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers, and we're glad you're with us today. And a little bit later, we're going to have a report from Sam Dick about a special court in Lexington that is quite interesting. As he takes a look at how different sorts of folks are being treated for matters when they have a mental illness. That's coming here in just a little bit. Let's talk with Daniel Cameron as we continue our discussion as he's running for Attorney General. You talk about, at least on your website and in your speeches, about having better relationships with federal partners.
Yes, sir.
What do you mean by that?
Well, look, I think the Attorney General, when you run to be the Attorney General, you run to be the Chief Law Enforcement Officer. And what that means, in my judgment, is that you're running to be a good partner, not only to the state law enforcement community, but also our federal law enforcement community. So that means the FBI, the U.S. Marshal Service, our federally appointed prosecutor, Rob Duncan, here in the Eastern District, Russell Coleman, who's our federally appointed prosecutor in the Western District. I don't think that you can have a strong, unified front in terms of confronting the drug epidemic unless you have strong relationships with those individuals and those federal law enforcement entities. I have those relationships because of the nature of the work that I did while I was in Washington, D.C. I think I can use those relationships to expand the pool of resources that our law enforcement community can have access to. I've already been thinking about ideas and ways in which to be able to do that. So I look forward, after November 5th, of being the Attorney General, making sure that we are advocating very strongly for all of our law enforcement community.
You have criticized Democrats on immigration and promised no sanctuary cities. And Stumbo and the current Attorney General, Andy Beshear, the nominee for governor, point out that there are no sanctuary cities in Kentucky, and the Attorney General says he has certified that. Is that nevertheless an important plank in your campaign, that your promise that there would not be? I mean, there are none.
Yes.
Right?
Well, let me say this. I think Mr. Stumbo in 2013 tried to get us down that path. When he was the Speaker of the House in 2013, he proposed legislation that would have given driver's licenses to illegal immigrants. Then he would have told our federal law enforcement community that they can't track those individuals. I think if you're running to be the Chief Law Enforcement Officer here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, again, being a good partner to our federal law enforcement community along with our state law enforcement community, I don't think you can make that sort of statement on the record, because our ICE officials have to enforce our immigration policies here. Imagine being an ICE official here in the Commonwealth and having to work with Mr. Stumbo when he's made that sort of statement on the record. I think in many ways you forfeit your right to be the Attorney General if you've made such statement. We're going to work diligently and closely with our federal partners, and I think part of that is working with our ICE officials.
What do you say in situations like over in Louisville, where the local officials have decided that possession of marijuana charges are not going to be treated in the way that the state law calls for them to be treated, and the officers are in conflict with, what are they to do? Do
Right.
what their superiors are telling them to do, or follow the state law?
Right. Well, I think our local police officers and law enforcement community have a responsibility to still enforce the law. The county attorney, Mr. O'Connell, has made that decision, and so he has to make a separate decision about whether to prosecute those individuals. And so I intend in the Attorney General's office to make sure that, to the best of my ability, making sure that I'm fostering stronger relationships where there might be some divides right now with our law enforcement community and our county and Commonwealth attorneys.
How do you feel, though, about generally the low possession levels and whether people are incarcerated for that?
Well, I think we need to certainly still enforce those laws. But as you talk to folks, our county attorneys or even our Commonwealth attorneys, primarily our county attorneys, they will tell you that they're not prosecuting those cases as vigorously as they once did because of some of the other issues and challenges that we have here in Kentucky as it relates to crystal meth and opioids. But I think Mr. O'Connell just made that statement on the record.
Kentucky has unfortunately been the scene of school shootings. We had one of the first in the 1980s here. We had the awful Paducah shootings. We've had Marshall County. We've also had mass shootings over the years, as you know. How do we deal with gun safety issues here in the Commonwealth?
Well, I think from the law enforcement standpoint, we've got to do a much better job of making sure that we have resources that allow for there to be folks within our schools that can protect our children as they're trying to learn. And so I will certainly be a part of that conversation. In fact, I was just talking to my mom last week about potentially doing some sort of forum, if you will, at the community college in E-Town to really talk about this issue and bring all the stakeholders to the table to figure out credible solutions for how we can make sure that we are protecting our children when they're in school.
Where do you stand just generally on the issue of gun control? I mean, do you...
We're going to protect the rights of our citizens here as it relates to the Second Amendment. I'm strongly in favor of our Second Amendment rights and will endeavor to do so at every situation.
Is bail reform in Kentucky something that you're interested in getting into? People who are being held pre-trial, in many cases will eventually be acquitted of the charges, but who are being held in some cases for months before that trial, and we have this overcrowding situation that is burdening a lot of our counties.
I am in favor of having that discussion. The Pegasus Institute, I think last week, earlier this year perhaps, put out a report about how many non-violent offenders are in jail essentially because they cannot pay bail, where there are actually violent actors who are able to pay bail and get out of jail. So I think that's a system that probably needs to be reviewed very closely, especially as we look at the overcrowding concerns that we have.
You had a gentleman in Louisville released after 5 years, acquitted, who was potentially facing the death penalty.
Yes, sir.
Sometimes we get it wrong, right?
Well, I think so, and I think that's why we in the law enforcement community and those that are partnering with the law enforcement community always have to be ready to look internally to make sure how can we improve our system. We have a responsibility, obviously, to do that. I hope to be a part of that responsibility and provide some solutions and ideas about how we can better foster relationships with all of our communities. You
anticipate President Trump will still come, and is that important to the Republicans?
I think so. I think it is incredibly important. I hope he makes it. I was obviously endorsed by President Trump and was grateful for that endorsement, and so I think he will probably make it here.
Daniel Cameron, thanks for coming.
Yes,
Republican candidate for Attorney General. We're coming back, a WKYT report on a special court in Lexington that deals with different kinds of offenders. Back with that in a moment. Welcome back to WKYT's Kentucky Newsmakers. A little-known court in Lexington is changing lives in some of the most difficult situations imaginable. The people who go to the special court are dealing with very complicated mental health challenges. Most also have drug problems, and they're facing trouble with the law. And getting them into a more stable, safe, and drug-free life can take years. But it's a start. WKYT was given special access to see how the Mental Health Diversion Court is changing lives person by person. Sam Dick has our story.
There's a district court judge.
You've developed a real vision.
And it's in a courtroom.
I never had a doubt that you would make it. I'm so proud of you.
But that's where the similarities end. There's no jury, no prosecutor or defense attorney.
Is it solid?
This is Mental Health Diversion Court in Fayette County. It meets every Monday afternoon. The people who come here have been referred by police, attorneys, and support specialists. Connie Milligan helped start the court 4 years ago.
The people come in homeless. They come in without treatment, without medication. Often they're in unsafe relationships, and their lives are just circling the drain.
All the clients have suffered some form of trauma, like child sexual abuse. They face criminal charges, substance abuse, and serious mental illness.
We know that people are not going to improve or get better by rotating through jail in the court system. It just doesn't work. And what we're able to do through the mental health court is wrap our arms around people by providing treatment, case management, and peer support.
So there is no quick fix, and it takes a team of people to provide all that help and support.
Is he dealing with trauma in his therapy?
Most of the people around this table are with NAMI of Lexington, the National Alliance on Mental Illness. The city of Lexington is a partner.
If we didn't have the mayor and the city council on board, there would be no mental health court.
The mental health court team includes victims advocates who have been through recovery themselves, a probation officer, case managers, an assistant county attorney, and Judge John Tackett.
This is a court that just spoke to me. I've got experience with folks with mental illness in my family.
On Monday before court, they discuss each person appearing that day in front of the judge, examining where that person is in treatment and their support group. They use 30 community partners like therapists and treatment facilities to help the clients. And some of that help even comes from out of state.
We've sent folks into treatment in different parts of the country because there was a specialized program that really spoke to their needs, and they hadn't been successful in local community activities.
In the end, it is up to the clients to make the changes.
I was facing homelessness. I was at my lowest from, being active in addiction. They gave me a chance.
The first time Brandon Starr tried the mental health court program, he couldn't make it work. But in this court, you get more than one chance.
I had been incarcerated maybe 4 or 5 months, so I was determined to get out, and not only to prove to them, but to prove to myself, that, hey, I can do this,
The second time worked for Brandon. He even landed a job at Jeff Ruby's Steakhouse and earned Employee of the Month. Judge Tackett is about to award Brandon with reaching Phase 4 in the program. They start in Phase 1 and work their way up. 4 means you've graduated.
Congratulations, Phase 4. You're killing it.
I'm just thankful they didn't give up on me. So I feel like I'm supposed to give back. You can't just have all that good and not want to give it back. Help somebody else. I'm grateful, and it's just a blessing.
Some success stories there in that report by our Sam Dick. Don't forget the Kentucky debate is coming up. The candidates for governor, Matt Bevin and Andy Beshear, face-to-face on stage at the University of Kentucky, the Singletary Center. That'll be Tuesday night. We'll bring it to you live on WKYT and on WKYT.com, and we hope you join us then. And we'll see you bright and early this week on WKYT This Morning. Make it a good week ahead.